hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we're looking at part 3 of our Toys and Joys 1948 Woodie Wagon build. Well, last week on the show, we made a lot of progress, and we have a lot of progress that we're hoping to make today. So without further ado, let's head over to the bench and see what we've got in store for today. Well, I want to make one of the most confusing pieces of this entire page 3, and that would be these inner fenders. We need a right and a left. Now, guys, we have made templates just like we did for the other pieces, and I have cut 2 blocks of walnut stock. These are 7/8 of an inch thick. They're 1 7/8 wide, and they are just 1/8 longer than what we need at 5 inches instead of 4 7/8. Now this one here, after cutting it, I've noticed there's quite a flaw here, but the cracking ends here. So what I'm hoping is I can keep this one in mind and we can use it for one of the fenders with this in the waist area and get rid of that broken section. So it's something to be said about inspecting each one of your blanks before you actually start cutting something, just to make sure it's going to work for you. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut this bottom line here. It's 3/4 of an inch up from the bottom, but we're only going to cut it to about the middle of our 1 5/8 diameter, just to get this back shoulder square. So for that, we can just set our table saw to the 3/4 of an inch that we need. That'll be 3/4 to the outside of the blade, and we're going to do a stopped cut on the table saw. So for that, I'm going to bring it in part way, and then once the blade is beyond the point where I want it, I'm just going to shut the saw off, let it slow down, let it completely stop, and then I can back my stock out. Well, the next thing that we want to do will be to cut this, for lack of a better term, cut this shoulder. And we can see here on the drawings that it is 3/8 of an inch wide and 3/4 of an inch tall. So all I've done is I've set my table saw blade to 3/4 of an inch in height, and we're going to cut the shoulder using our miter fence. Well, at this point, we have something that looks like this, and it would appear that we are going to actually manage to get rid of that bad piece that's in this one section. Now, I know that we have to make a right and a left, but we don't really have to worry about that just yet. We worry about the left and right when we do the top profile, but for now we're doing the side profile, and that's just fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to line up our template as best we can. We'll use our straight edge to help us. We're going to trace out this fender here and this one little shoulder here, and we're going to take it over to the scroll saw and cut that out. And we'll do it on both of our pieces. Again, don't worry about right or left. It doesn't matter right now. And while we're at it, we will also trace out the taper here at the top and our back edge. Well, at this point, you should have 2 pieces that look like this. We haven't done the back taper, nor have we done that back radius there, the 1/2 inch radius. We just have 2 pieces that look like this. Now, if we look at the plans, we can see here that the angle starts on our top profile at 2 3/16 of an inch back from the front edge. So we've drawn a line here along the top and along one side of our profile at 2 3/16. I have also, from our front here, placed a square onto the bottom of all of our assemblies, and from our square front edge and going along our fender supports, I have drawn a square line continuing that on to the back of our hood piece. So I'm going to try to explain this as best I can. Guys, this is just for the marking process. So what we're going to do is we're going to place our square on the front edge and line it up perfectly with that front edge. and then hold the square in place. Now, you can hold it with clamps or you can hold it by hand, whatever you want to do. And once you're happy with how that's lined up, we're going to take one of our fender pieces and place it in the orientation that it goes, but on the bottom up against the square. And if we look from the top edge with our square in place, we will be able to line up that line at 2 3/16. We'll be able to line it up right at that point where the angle starts to move. And once we get that, we can now use the body or the hood base to trace out where it says to that sand to fit. We can trace that out and get our profile drawn on there. And we're going to need to trace out that profile on both our left and our right fenders. And once you get it traced, I would suggest taking a pencil and marking your waist area so that you don't get confused. This way you know you're not going to cut the wrong side or cut on the wrong side of that pencil line. Well, at some point in time, we're going to need to cut and sand those profiles. But how do you do it? If we put it through like this, it's very difficult. You're now changing angles. You're not getting square cuts. Things are going a little wonky on you. So basically, put the piece of wood back to the way that it was. And in order to do that, we have some 3/4 inch scrap pine here. We're just going to double side tape it to the bottom of our piece. And you can check if you wish with a square to make sure that that brings that back up to a square edge here, which would make this parallel to the tabletop surface. So just double check that your piece is back to the way it was essentially by replacing this end piece, and then you are able to cut this and sand it properly without having to worry about things being off. But we're not going to do that yet, because our tracing of our profile only goes as far as the back edge of our hood. So before we can do anything else, we need to make this windshield bottom. So the first thing that we want to do in order to make this windshield bottom is we want to basically cut these angles on either side. We have some 1/2 inch stock. I've measured the angle on the print and found it to be 14 degrees. So just over at the table saw, we are going to cut our 14-degree angle, and we're going to sneak up on it and keep testing against our hood assembly until we get the fit right so that that 14-degree angle lines up perfectly with the body of our hood. Well, I'm pretty happy with the fit of that. So using our straight edge so that we can align our template, I'm just going to sit this here centered. Our actual cut piece is actually a little smaller than what our template is, and that's to be expected. You have to remember we've been doing quite a bit of sanding on the hood. So it's not drastically small though, and that would be a problem. So we're just going to get this template centered on here. We're going to mark it out, and I'm going to cut this over at the scroll saw, and then we're going to sand up to the line at the belt sander to finish it off. And when you get it all done, you should have a piece that looks like this. So now, you remember that 7/16 profile that was in the hood center? Well, that's what we're going to want to sand now. So using this windshield bottom, we're going to use that to line up along the top as best we can. We're going to trace out the profile of our windshield bottom onto that center hood section, the hood center, and then we're going to go over to the oscillating drum sander using a 1/4 inch drum, and we're going to sand this profile in on this hood center. And now the final step with this piece would be the round over at either end. Guys, it's the same round over as we did here on the hood. It's very easily done at the router table, but I can't stress enough that you shouldn't even attempt it without a starter pin to support this. It's just going to grab it and pull it out of your hands. But with the starter pin, there's enough stock that you can hang on to it, keeping far enough away from the blade and just pivot into that router bit and get that very quick routing done. So now a little bit of a hand sanding, and this can get glued into place. Now, guys, if we look here on the drawing, we can see that it is pretty much level with our hood. So we're going to line this up, get it in place, and then once we're happy with how flush this is here, we are going to clamp it down and let it completely dry. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a glue up advice. If you don't want squeeze out, for here I don't want squeeze out of the top or very little. So I'm going to exaggerate this to show you here. Basically I have one bead of glue along our piece. I'm going to put the top where I don't want the squeeze out against the wood first, and then I'm going to lower it down into place. Now, what this does is it kind of forces the glue, it kind of guides it and makes it so that it goes to the bottom. Now, will it completely eliminate squeeze out on this piece? Probably not, but it will definitely reduce it. So, depending on which way you want the squeeze out to go, you can kind of align it and basically coax it to go where you want so that you have less of a squeeze out mess on the front or the hood of your vehicle. And by using that method, we have zero squeeze out here at the top. A little bit of misalignment there. I may have to look into that. But we have all of our squeeze out the bottom. So we've kept the top of our hood perfectly clean, and we can clean this up using some cotton swabs and some water. And if it raises the grain a little bit in there, it's on the inside of the model. You'll never see it. It's going to get buried in glue ups. All right, so the next piece that we want to make are going to be these hood rear panels. We need a right and a left. Guys, these are kind of tricky pieces. So I'm going to show you the method that I'm going to use, and you can decide if you want to do that. For starters, I have our hood assembly here, the whole thing. I have a square just lightly clamped to the back. And the reason for that is to give me a square reference, to make sure that everything here is square, because I don't really want to trust what we've done here. I don't want to trust our measurements or the measurements of the plans, because things can change as you go. So I know that I need this piece underneath here, and what I want to do is I want to line up this piece. This is 1 inch wide and longer than what we need, but it's 1/2 inch thick, which is also thicker than what we need. I'm going to line it up here flush with the bottom of our windshield bottom, and I'm just going to mark right in here in this corner, showing where the angled cut starts, and that would be this angled cut right here. Okay, and with that done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little 2-inch square and I'm going to square that line off, and then I will verify it again against my hood assembly to make sure that I have the line in the right place. And yeah, that looks just about right. So while I have this set up like this, I am also going to mark the bottom of our piece. Again, you can take the measurements off of the prints, but we've been doing a lot of shaping here, a lot of sanding, and we just want to make sure that we don't end up with a piece that's too small. Okay, so there is the measurement for our length, and this is the measurement for our angled cut. So this is where we're going to start. And when I say for our length, what I mean is the length for our rabbet that we have here on the drawing for the hood rear panel. So now, holding this piece where it should go, if we look at our angles here in the back, we will see which way our 9-degree angle has to go, and it has to go in this way. So I have drawn just a little tick mark there to show us where it is that that little angle needs to go, the direction it needs to travel. Now, if you remember from when we did our actual hood pieces, we determined that 81-degree angle to actually be a 9-degree angle on our miter fence. So I have my protractor, my digital protractor here set to 9 degrees, and I'm just going to transfer that 9-degree angle using the squared off line that we put on there as our base. So at this point, you should have something that looks like this. So I will square off that corner line all the way down the front face of our block. And we will now use a handsaw, believe it or not, and we are going to cut that 9-degree angle all the way down to meet that line that we marked as the base or the bottom of our cut. Now, with that done, we can turn this on its side and we can cut along here. Now, if you want, you can use a table saw to cut this to get the shoulder perfectly square. And I think that's pretty much what I'm going to do. If you end up cutting a little bit of the angle off on the inside, don't worry about it. It's buried inside of the model. And now you can measure down from your shoulder that you cut. You can measure down 1 3/16 and cut it to length. Now this piece, guys, is going to sit right here. However, if you remember, we made this from 1/2-inch thick stock. This piece that it shows here is only 7/16. So I have placed a mark here, 7/16 from the inner edge, and that is where this is going to get glued into place, just like this. Now I know it doesn't look like what it does on the prints, but we're going to get to that. So at this point, you can now make one identical to this, except for the opposite side. And what we can do is, with that 7/16 line aligned with the corner of our windshield bottom, we can actually glue these in place. You just want to make sure that they're square to the body and that they're basically square to everything. Don't mess that up. We need to have these square. So get them aligned, get them dried, and let them set up. Well, guys, when gluing these in place, use everything in your arsenal that you can to get them straight. For starters, get this thing clamped to the bench. I have a couple pieces of scrap maple, 1/4-inch thick, to raise it up above that center hood piece. And this here is rock solid, like that's not going anywhere. So now I have 2 free hands. But don't forget too, setup blocks have square edges as well. And the good thing about a setup block is that you can put it up here, rest it up against your piece, and now that frees up a hand as well. You can sit a square down in the bottom here. Make sure that everything is aligned perfectly and do a dry run before you apply any glue. Make sure that what you're gluing together is exactly the way you want it. Well, there is still more to do to these hood rear panels, but there's absolutely nothing we can do until this entire thing is completely dried. So I don't want to mess with it. I'm going to put it aside and we can move on to a couple other pieces. And what we're going to move on to is our center fenders. We're going to need one for the left and for the right. And basically, because at this point we're only marking a side profile, all that really means to you is what side do you want to face out? That's all you have to be concerned with. So I have 2 pieces of stock here. They're cut to be 5 inches long. They're actually a little longer, 5 1/8. They are 2 3/8 wide and they're 9/16 of an inch thick. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to trace these patterns that we made for the templates. We're going to trace them onto here and we will take them over to the scroll saw and very carefully we're going to cut them out. And there we have our 2 fenders cut. Now there is still some shaping to do, as we can see here on the top profile. we have a little bit of a curve at the back end, and we also have this little tiny notch. We're not going to be doing that notch right now, but we are going to do that curve. So to make things a little simpler, I marked that curve. I don't know if the camera is going to show it, but I marked that curve on the bottom of each piece. And that way we can take this over to the belt sander. I can hold it flat onto the flat section, not the tapered section. Make sure you don't have it leaning forward like that. You want it flat back here. And we're going to gently shape this along and curve that in. Don't worry about that little one. That's shaped to match the body. We're going to do that later. So let's get this shaped. And then once we get the sanding done on that, we can move on to the next step. And with those shaped, a little bit of hand sanding just down over where we just formed it, or where we just shaped it, will take those final scratches out of it. And we can soften up this little curve here as well. Not too much, but we'll just soften it just a little. Now guys, what we're going to do now is we are going to do these outer fenders, and we're going to do the exact same process as what we've done here. The only difference is we're not going to do any of the outer shaping. We can see here on the drawing that we have curves both at the front and the back. We're not concerned about that right now. What we want is just to get the profiles of these things done. So the same process as this, we're going to get some 3/16 inch thick stock, walnut in this case. We're going to cut it to our final dimensions. Here it's 4 inches. We're going to give ourselves a little wiggle room, just like we did with the other one. So 4 1/8, and we're going to cut it to 2 5/16 wide. We're going to change our scroll saw blade, very important. We've been using a number 7 reverse tooth for this 1/2 inch thick walnut. 3/16 a number 7 blade is way too aggressive. You'll lose control. So we're going to put in a number 3 reverse tooth, and we're going to cut out our outer fenders. Okay, and those are the outer fender pieces cut. We haven't done any sanding. We're going to get back to those. We now want to turn our attention back to these hood rear panels. And the very first thing we're going to do, guys, I've taken that 1/4 inch maple that I had supporting this earlier, and I have cut some shapes here, kind of mimicking our hood, but I've cut it inside so that it's not sticking out beyond the hood. We're going to use some double-sided tape to hold this in place, and once we get that done, we're going to head over to the belt sander. Well, first and foremost, I cannot stress enough that before you start this process, you check your belt for square to your table. It's very important that it be square. This one looks like it's just a tiny bit off, so I'm gonna fix that up and get it so that it's perfect. Guys, if it takes you 20 minutes to get this right, then spend the 20 minutes and get it right. Then it's right. You don't have to worry about it. So, that actually looks pretty good to me. Most of my stuff is kept square, so I really don't have many adjustments to do when something is slightly out. Okay, so here's the kind of cool part. I've measured on the prints, and if we look, we can see that the back, which we already know, is 7/16 of an inch. That's the back section right back here along the back of our pieces. The other section, there is no dimension, but I've scaled off the drawing, and it's 3/16 of an inch. So what I have done is I've transferred those marks just as a guide, just as a reference to the tops, or the bottoms in this case, of our blocks. Now our maple is in place to keep this flat and flush to our table. And guys, all I'm going to do is use the belt sander to mimic the profile here along the sides. We're going to creep up on it and get it till where we like it. And when we're pretty much happy with it, we're going to finish it off the last little bit on the disc sander. The reason being, it's got a finer grit disc on it than what this belt is, and it's a little less aggressive. So let's get this shaped up and I'll show you what to do when you get that shaped. And there we go. That is those pieces done. And they are perfect along the side here, and that's what we're looking for. No crazy angles had to be cut. Nothing put our fingers at risk. The last thing to do here for those pieces, as you can see, or maybe you can't, I don't know if the camera's showing it, but we actually had to bite into the profile for our base and our hood piece just to smooth that out, and we had to do the same on the opposite side just a little bit. So I'm going to get a sanding block and I'm going to sand here and straighten this out as well. Our profile that is on our windshield bottom and on the top of our hood don't exactly match. So we're going to straighten those out with a sanding block as well. And once we get this all sanded, then we can move back to our inner fender pieces that we were waiting for that final profile mark. And unfortunately, once again, we have run out of time. I'm amazed at how fast these 3 episodes have gone, but they have gone and gone quickly. Guys, we're making some great progress and there's a lot more to come. You may have noticed throughout the first 3 parts of this series that the video quality may have been up and down, and I apologize for that. I have some new video equipment and there's a bit of a learning curve to using it. My old one kind of gave out, so I've been learning the new video equipment, and I think we're on the upswing now. I think I'm actually getting it, how to use it. So either way, the video hopefully will improve now as this one has, and it will continue to be improved as we go along. Either way, guys, if you have found any part of this helpful or enjoyable, hey, you know what? Why not like and subscribe to the channel? We have an amazing audience base, and I'm hoping that you're going to consider becoming a part of it. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed today's part 3. I hope you've enjoyed the content I've brought you. I hope that I've provided you with a way to look at making pieces just a little bit differently, because sometimes it's not always so cut and dry by the pattern. And more importantly, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.